Welcome to the ODI, everybody. Great to have you here for the Lunchtime Lecture. I'd just like to introduce our colleague, Allison Savich from Sport England.
Hi.
So she's going to be talking about a project that we're working on at the ODI called OpenActive, and I guess more generally about how data can be used to help increase participation. Allison's job title is Strategic Lead for Data and Market Innovation. I got that right?
Yeah.
Good. So yeah, it's a really great talk, really exciting subject, so I hope you enjoy it. We'll take questions at the end if that's okay. And if you're listening to the live stream and you want to comment or ask a question, you can do so using the hashtag ODI Fridays. Over to you.
Thanks. So thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for sharing your lunchtime with me. As Richard said, I'm just going to talk about the journey we've been on a little bit as a sector, so as a sport and physical activity sector, and the role that open data can play in that. We've been working with the ODI for about 18 months now, and we've learnt a lot along the way, so I'll share some of those learnings with you. But I guess firstly, to start, sort of why open data for our sector? And I think it's fair to say that most people will tell you they know that physical activity is good for them. And lots of people will tell you that they know they should do more physical activity. But there's something that's stopping them. And from our research, we know that that's often a combination of practical and emotional barriers that really prevent you from fitting physical activity into your life. And one of those practical barriers is actually finding information about physical activity online. We hear this a lot from our consumers. Hopefully you may have seen This Girl Can. It's a really successful campaign that's all about encouraging women in particular to get active. And it focuses specifically on an emotional barrier, which for women is about a fear of judgment. But we continue to hear, so there's about 2.9 million women who have actually taken action as a result of this fantastic campaign. But we consistently hear from them that they're still frustrated about where can I find physical activity near me? Where can I find something relevant to do with my kids and my family on the weekend? And that's a really, really frustrating challenge for people when in other parts of your life, this is actually quite easy to do. But we think and we believe that the reason for this is because the data that people are looking for isn't openly available. So even though people have this really strong intention to be active, the ability to actually make a really informed choice about what they're going to do is still really, really hard. And I guess, and as we know, with lots of competition for our time these days and for what we do in our leisure time, it's pretty easy then for physical activity to slip out of that sort of decision-making process. And we certainly don't want that to happen. And as I said, there's lots of other sectors out there. I guess you know these brands, you've probably used them quite regularly in your lives at the moment. But there are other sectors that are overcoming this discoverability problem. You know, they are making it really easy to find things that you need. So everything from accommodation to transport, and obviously we all know Netflix. But these business models, they've emerged. They're emerging to help us. There's new business models happening all the time. That innovation is really taking it, what used to be quite hard, and making it really quite easily. And we want that same thing for physical activity. Especially, I would say, because the act of being physically active is never going to get any easier. You know, sort of that marathon, the walk to get the bus instead of running to work, you know, all these decisions that we're making every day about where we fit physical activity in, that is hard in itself as making a decision, but then to get the benefit of being physically active, obviously that requires effort. And as humans, we're often removing effort from our lives all the time. We want things to be simple and easy. But sadly, physical activity as an actual exercise is quite hard. So how do we make it easy for people to find physical activity data? And again, I think we believe that it's opening up that physical activity data. And in doing so, this is sort of information that comes from Sport England's Active Lives survey. It's a nationally representative survey. I think if we can open up this data, we're going to solve a problem for quite a large amount of people. As you can see, there are sort of over 60% of the population who, in the chief medical officer's definition of being active, 60% are fitting activity into their lives. But you can see in the middle there that sort of 5.6 million for which they really are trying to create a regular habit, that kind of over 150-minute mark. For them, there is still a barrier. There's lots of barriers, but one of those is finding physical activity. And for Sport England, we also want physical activity to be for everyone. So I guess as a sector, we may in the past have traditionally focused on probably what you would define the core market. We as Sport England we're only allowed to invest in traditional sport, but with a new strategy from both ourselves and from government, we are now able to invest much more broader than that. And that aligns with what consumers think and feel anyway about physical activity. You know, it's everything from dance to active travel to walking to Zumba, sort of everything, fitness, gym. All those activities now are what we're interested in and we can invest in. But this vision in terms of wanting everyone in England, regardless of their age, their background, their level of ability, we want them all to feel like physical activity is something that is for them. But that's a really, really tough challenge, actually. You know, there are those national figures that I just showed you, they really mask a lot of inequality out there. You know, sort of women are less likely to be active than men. You know, if you have a disability, and particularly if you have multiple disabilities, you're less likely to be active. People from lower socioeconomic groups are less likely to be active. And particularly if you're a young person, obviously you are active at a young age, and as you get older, that decreases. So we need to work and sort of understand all those different inequalities that exist for different parts of our society. So our challenge is big, but physical activity is often described as a wonder drug, and it's true. You know, there's lots of benefits that come from physical activity that aren't just physical. The mental side of physical activity, that combination, you know, the evidence base is growing all the time now about the importance of physical activity for those parts of our lives. You know, individual development, social cohesion, economic development, all these outcomes are something that we now need to think about and think about the way that physical activity can support those. But of course, we also need a sector that welcomes everyone. So on the side of, you know, we've got a lot of things that Sport England are thinking about on the demand side, but on the supply side, we really need to support our sector to evolve and change and move with consumers. And we need to make sure that they're delivering an experience that meets all these different customer needs. And of course, this is where open data comes back in again. So in both Sport England and the government strategies, they do talk about data and they talk about open data. We, particularly at Sport England, as I said, we want to help our sector be fit for the future. We want them to keep up with the digital expectations of consumers and make it as easy as it is to go on Airbnb and book accommodation. The government also recognised that there's a need for organisations in the sport sector to evolve. And so we do have conditions in our funding that actually require sport organisations to open up their data. But we also have a view, and it's a similar view of the ODI, that, you know, sort of that stick, it's there, but we don't want to use the stick, actually. We do believe and we want our sector to see the benefit of changing and evolving and using open data, and open data becoming the norm. And that combination of the ODI and Sport England working together, there's a really nice narrative there, and that is why we came together. So as Sport England, obviously, we desire to achieve this change, but we don't have the technical expertise or the knowledge about how to create data and ecosystems around that. So we created a partnership with the ODI a couple of years ago, and it's really nice because, as I said, we're both focused on really solving challenges for society. Obviously, our challenge is physical activity, but there's lots of other challenges that the ODI are working on as well. And the OpenActive as a whole, as an initiative, it's been going for quite a while, actually. It was a really sort of small grassroots community initiative that's been bubbling along for quite a while. And we took over, well, the ODI took over stewardship of that in November 2016. And since then, we've been working to really scale that initiative and to support those organisations that had started all this in the first place. I guess you're probably still thinking, what is OpenActive? And the engagement team that Richard was a part of actually created a nice little video. So if I can just show you that now, it's about 3 minutes long, but it gives a good sense of what OpenActive is.
Has the potential to revolutionise our industry. It can attract more customers, make your activities easier to find and book, and encourage more people to get active. Simply put, open data means you can reach more customers. It's basically free marketing. Let me show you how. The travel industry shares data really well. This means that websites like lastminute.com, Skyscanner and Expedia get up-to-date and accurate information about flights and hotels from most providers easily. These services offer variety and convenience to consumers, and as a result, the travel providers reach way more customers. OpenActive wants to do the same for our industry. Our mission is to help more people get active. We're a community of organisations and individuals, backed by the government, working together to help promote the benefits of open data and help create common standards so that we're all speaking the same language. To be clear, open data means information like timings, prices, location, availability, descriptions and images. Details that are probably already public, not personal information about your customers. Sounds great, but what does it all look like? Well, you may already use a booking system to list your activities online. Opening your data is usually just as simple as ticking a box in the settings. Innovators and businesses can use your data in amazing ways, like featuring your activities and facilities in apps and websites that attract millions of users, or through communities and services that engage local people, but also in new, incredible ways that we can't imagine yet. Using your data that automatically kept up to date without any extra effort from you. Discovering and booking your activities will be easier than ever. So many have already begun to embrace open data and are reaping the benefits. Whether you're an individual or an organisation, open your data. Increase your engagement. Grow your attendance. And help more people get active.
So hopefully that gives a good sense, I guess, of why OpenActive is really important for our sector. But I guess what I'd like to now do is just talk a bit about what underpins OpenActive and what are the component parts that make it up, because there's a lot going on behind the scenes. Essentially, I guess OpenActive is a sector change program, really. You know, in order to encourage a lot of our partners to open their data, a lot of that involves sort of encouraging them to change the way things maybe work at the moment or how they work as organizations and together as a sector. And you might have seen this wheel before, the Open Innovation Wheel that the ODI created. And I guess we took this and we used this as the base for where we would start with OpenActive. This OpenActive, I guess, is the first sector change program of this scale for the ODI, and it's certainly the first that we're aware of for physical activity, and that's really exciting. Phase one, though, we took an approach that said we'd focus on a particular key aspects, and the first of those was literacy, so data literacy. I think as a sector, as a sport and physical activity sector, data isn't naturally part of our language and part of the way we work. So there's a lot that we're doing at the moment around sort of running open data in a day workshops. You know, we created e-learning modules, and we're getting out there and we're encouraging lots of people across our sector to sign up and to get involved and to understand, just as a starter, what is open data. Richard, who obviously you saw before, he leads our engagement team. And I guess so a lot of the work as well is about having one-to-one conversations with key sector partners, once again, to encourage them to understand open data. But if we're going to get them to actually open their opportunity data, we need to have those conversations. And it often takes more than just one to get that going. We do a lot on the advocacy side, so communications is really important as part of this program. And also we have obviously websites, social, lots of channels to try and push our messages out. The other key aspect that we included in phase one, which lasted sort of about 9 months actually, we also know that as a sector we don't have standardized information. It's not sort of the most exciting kind of pretty end of the spectrum sort of for our sector. It's definitely something that's really challenging to get them engaged in. But having a common language, having that common data standard in order to then create the booking standards, to then open the data, it's so critical. We're spending a lot of time there as well. And as a sector, as I said, we don't have a common language. So there's an example that's often used by Swim England. They did some research and they found there was over 6,000 different names for swimming. So if you think as a consumer, if you're going to try and find swimming, there's so many different variants of it, it's really confusing. So we want to get that down. We want to actually get to the core of, are these activities swimming? And obviously then, yes, as an operator, you can brand them, you can market them in whichever way works for the consumer you're trying to reach. But in the back end and the technical side, we still do need an activity list that helps us standardize so that we can share this information more widely. So as I said, phase one is, that was our first 9 months of working together. And that really got us to a point of building a really strong foundation of kind of the principles that we could then leverage to work on and really start to grow this wheel. So then phase two, and we also created an advisory board because of obviously important that at the start we got buy-in from a lot of our partners. So that advisory board makes up sort of people like leisure operators, national governing bodies, county sport partnerships, influencers like OpenActive and Sport and Recreation Alliance. And it's really critical actually, because again, they're part of our journey. And if we're going to make this sustainable, we need everyone to be on that journey with us from the start. And then phase two, which we're in at the moment, so we're right in the thick of it. Phase two is more about putting that innovation that's at the center at that wheel, putting that at the heart of what we're doing as well. And so I won't go through all these in detail, and I've got a couple actually that I'll touch on in more detail in a second, but there's some really critical things here, because for phase two, like you said, if we're going to prove that opening data has value, we need to have people out there that are starting to use this data to show that value back to the activity providers, to the people publishing their data. And so part of that is the Startup Accelerator Program, where we've got 10 startups, which I'll talk about in a second, that we're working with, so sharing our sector knowledge, but also the ODI sharing their knowledge to really help them accelerate the things they're doing. We're also starting some work around sustainability, because I guess when we started, we believed this is a 3-year program, and the sustainability planning at the moment will tell us whether we've got that right or not, and whether it needs to be longer. But sustainability for us really is that open data becomes the norm, so that everyone is bought into it. Sport England, we're proud to lead with the ODI, this initiative, but we can't fund it forever. We're a non-government body and we just can't continue to fund this on our own. So there's something about what do we need to do to gather buy-in to actually get other people to engage and see this as value, so that this does become the norm. We're doing a lot of work around theory of change and impact and research and showing that value back. And we also want to take this outside London. So I guess the Data Champions work stream is really critical for us, because at the moment, yes, a lot of innovation happens in London, but we know that innovation and data it's just as critical, and there's spots bubbling up all over the place across the country. So we need to make sure we're engaged in those as well, and ensuring that, again, open data is part of that consumer experience. And the experience in physical activity in different parts of the country is very different. So we need to make sure that this model is going to work for all people across the country. So as I said, I'm going to touch on now, I guess, a couple of things that we've learned along the way. As I said, one of the most important work streams of ours is all about opening data. And I think it'd be fair to say it remains our biggest challenge. We have made some really good progress in this space. When we took over the initiative, I think there was about 8 data sets that were already open, so it was already happening. We were able to scale that kind of in 9 months to sort of over 20. But we're still going, and I think there's still more work to be done. And we learnt a lot actually about the process of opening data as part of that. I think we often, when we started, it was always, we got lots of engagement from probably more technical individuals, the people at the heart and soul who could see the value of this in terms of their organisation. And we sort of started there, but then it eventually got to a point where if that sort of message is going up in an organisation, and some of ours have quite a number of layers, you get to a point where maybe someone doesn't quite get it. They sort of, I don't know what this open data is. No, I'm not interested. We're not doing it. and it stops, the conversation stops. So we've definitely changed our approach as we've moved through to sort of say, yes, we need to get the technical buy-in because they'll be the ones that actually make the change and manage it going forward. But we also really do need that strategic buy-in at the top, and that's where we've been spending quite a lot of our effort as well. We've also learnt along the way that there's particular partners in our sector that actually have a really critical role to play. So if you think about the technology that sits behind a lot of the booking systems, so we call them platform providers, but they have a really critical role to play because obviously they are there, they're going to need to make changes actually to their systems that have been around for quite a long time. They might have to make changes to their business model as new startups and innovation comes into our sector. So we need to now work quite closely with them to support them through that change. So that's another thing we've learnt. And obviously with any culture change, sector change program, it's really hard. I think we probably thought we would be a lot further along than what we are now, if we are honest. But that's okay, because I think we are learning a lot and we're still going in that direction. And as I said, we have quite a lot more people now engaged, and we've broadened out into different parts of the sector, which is really fantastic. So we've got really strong relationships anyway at Sport England with the outdoor partners, so people like Forestry Commission, National Trust, the Rivers and Canals Trust, and they're really critical because I think when you think about physical activity, not everyone thinks about traditional sport. And as we know, being outdoors in the environment, a lot of those mental health benefits, social cohesion is really critical. So they're working through this process, and they're in the process of implementing open data. And we think as soon as that data starts to become available, you know, the innovation and the startups and the things that we can create with that is maybe something we can't imagine yet, but it's really exciting. And as I said, we have got some really strong engagement from those platform providers now. So one of those is Legend, and they are well on the way as well to progressing towards open data, which is fantastic. The other aspect I think I just want to touch on is the data standard, because as I said, this is really critical for us as an organisation. And as I said, the concept of a common language really resonates for our sector, but the knowledge and experience in how you do that is really not something that's natural to us. So we've been, with the support of the ODI, obviously using a W3C community to really get that going. When we started, I think we probably only had about 7 or 8 people join the first call, and we thought, oh God, this is not going to go well. But that gradually increased. It sort of, I think by the end of phase 1, we had about 30 people engaged from quite a wide variety of stakeholders. And there's now over 70 people registered on our W3C community, which is fantastic. And it's growing all the time, because as I said, as we're now starting to work with startups and entrepreneurs, having their voice in that conversation is critical. I'm really passionate about making sure that consumer voice is heard. So when you're creating a data standard, it's not just creating that data standard for us as a sector in order to manage our information. This is about creating that data standards that you're able to create the solutions and put it in a language that consumers can really understand. We've also learned through that process that booking is quite a key topic for this as a sector change program. So from a consumer point of view, often you're not always thinking about, I want to book this activity. Often you're still in kind of contemplation phase, if you like. If you think about the behavior change journey, you're still thinking about whether this is even right for me or not. But as a sector and as working with the platform providers and with the data users, booking is really important. So now we're starting to create a booking standard to really start to support and show that we're moving in that direction. The other thing we learn, like you said, with the startups now involved, we're learning that some of these data types are more important than others. For example, we at the moment our data standard doesn't talk about route data. So if you think about a cycling trail or a canal sort of trail, that our data standard hasn't yet attacked that kind of data and sort of said, okay, how do we standardize and publish this in a common way? Lots of our startups, though, are saying, actually, that's a really good entry point. You know, I want to be able to show routes or walking routes on my new service. So that conversation is really important. So we're now saying, look, there are people out here wanting this standard. Let's prioritize that. And talking about the startups, as I said, this is a really new strand in phase 2, but a really important one. And it really, for me, it makes that concept of open data really tangible. Because as I said, a lot of it, you know, it's difficult maybe to understand the theory, but as soon as you can start to see what might be produced at the end of that process, people get really excited about it. So we've got 10 startups that we've selected through a process. We commenced this on the 1st of May, so they're literally just getting their skin sort of in the game, but they are really, really interesting, and I'd encourage you to have a look. Richard wrote a great blog on the ODI website to have a look at that and to understand a little bit more about them. And I think the other thing we've learned as we went, sort of startups are one type of data user, but there's lots of campaigns that are bubbling at the moment and growing sort of about the importance of physical activity. As I said, hopefully you know of our This Girl Can campaign, but you've got Change for Life, you've got BBC's Get Inspired. So the narrative about physical activity, the message is definitely there. As I said, but if you think back to where we started, the message is great, but if you then go to try and find something and you can't find it, it's that behavior change journey is potentially going to be one you drop out of because you think, oh, it's just too hard, I'll go to the movies instead. But the engagement team are working really hard to actually get these opportunities almost crystallized. So say, what is the opportunity? What is the date by which we'd like you to open your data? So that we can put tangible markers in, because otherwise, we might just go along for a bit of time and sort of we won't actually get to the finish line, whereas we're pushing, we really want to see this change happen quicker than maybe people naturally would let it do. And I think just coming to a bit of a close, there's a lot more to be done, as I said, and I think we're keen that as a sector that this is all about collaboration. It's not Sport England or the ODI telling you to do this. This is about you seeing the value and wanting open data to be part of our world. We're certainly committed to it. I know the ODI are committed to it, and we're encouraging, I guess, our sector all the time to be part of this journey. But phase 2, I guess, takes us to November. So we've got a 6-month window now to really show tangible change and to really show the value. And so I guess if you are involved in any time of physical activity, I guess I'd encourage you to get them to open their data. Just start that message and get it rolling. And I just wanted to end on a quote actually from someone who's in our sector, Steve Ward, who works for GLL, which is the Better Gyms. You may know them, big green kind of imagery. They're a leisure operator. But to have him say this is, I guess, a really positive point for us to say that someone within our sector who isn't from the Sport England or the ODI is talking about open data. And he's actually summed it up really great. Sort of, he's saying to us, don't miss this opportunity. Because the opportunity of open data is critical to helping people change their lives, helping them put physical activity at the heart of their lifestyles. And we really want to help consumers make that informed choice. Thanks.
I've lost my microphone. Thanks, Alison, that was awesome. So we've got time now for questions. I will start us off with a simple one so people can kind of cogitate on the questions they might like to ask. Sorry. So yeah, first question, I suppose, you're talking about the challenge we've got in getting this embedded as a strategic priority for the publishers and the platform providers. Obviously a really helpful thing to get OpenActive going was having it as a strategic priority in Sport England. And I was wondering if you could just sort of talk through how you kind of won that battle and got it in your strategy, because I think that there might be tips that other people in the room could pick up on.
Good question. It wasn't a quick win, that's for sure. My background, I guess, is originally finance, but also working in an insight team. And Sport England's lucky to have kind of a significant resource about insight. But part of that was just actually doing some research and then being able to actually lay out, I guess, the role that digital. So I guess our sector talks about digital a lot rather than data. They naturally think about the solution rather than the problem. So we used a lot, I guess, of research and insight that backs this up to then encourage our internal stakeholders to see the value. And I guess luckily they've seen that, as has government actually. And we're lucky as well that there's a lot of narrative at the moment around data, which is really supportive, which we can piggy on the back of as well. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. So any questions from the room? If you do want to ask a question, then please speak into the microphone. Okay.
My question is, are there any, apart from the obvious like booking physical activity or kind of knowing where it's going on, are there any opportunities for kind of linking this data to other things and to kind of create other interesting and less obvious services?
Yeah, definitely. I think, your mind's the limit, right? But we're doing a lot of work with GPs, so GP referral schemes and understanding those. And we see that as an important sort of piece of information, that if a GP had that available to them, that they could actually help someone make an informed decision or make that decision for them as where they start with physical activity. And likewise, we're having conversations with Richmond Group. Richmond Group are an overarching body of about 14 charities across the country. And for them, it's almost like, when someone calls up that helpline and if physical activity is mentioned, it's something that, again, as a resource, this information, like I said, at the moment, they really can't find it. It's really difficult unless they know themselves what the answer is. So yes, there's lots of other use cases. Even new forms of physical activity or new partnerships, I think, can be created off the back of this. Okay.
Any other questions from the room? Someone over there.
So you described some of the other sectors or domains where data sharing does take place, so they do function fairly well. Why is it, do you think, that the sport and physical activity sector didn't sort of self-organise in the same way?
I think it's not natural for us. As I said, we're often focused on the solution, the end product, which is often a program of physical activity. I think digitally we are sort of progressing along that transformation journey, and I don't think anyone actually would have thought about open data. I think lots of people may in our sector know about things we've tried in the past, which was almost, we thought there was a single solution. We thought that if you could create one website and get them to come to it, that would be our answer. But we now know that's not the case, and especially from a consumer point of view, choice is really important. So having a range of services, as many as you can think of, that puts this data in places you wouldn't naturally go to find it, was not something that I think as a sector we'd really thought about yet. So for example, something like Airbnb, if you could book an Airbnb and still maintain your yoga habit because there's a yoga class around the corner, that would be amazing. So I'm hoping something like that happens. Thank you, Airbnb, please.
Any other questions? We haven't had any from this side of the room. So I'm going to look at all you guys to put your hands up. No? Have we got any questions online?
No. I've got one.
Okay.
Sorry, it's me again. What's the main challenge that publishers, or what's the main issue that publishers have with publishing their data in the first place? Like what problems do they come to you with?
I think Richard probably jump in as well, but culturally, it's probably firstly a cultural challenge. It's a little bit of, naturally you're protective of your data. So we often, the first conversation is, no, I can't give you it, it's my commercial value. Whereas when we have that conversation to say, look, we're not asking for personal data, this is actually information that consumers are looking for all the time. It's possibly even on your website, but imagine if it was on someone else's and they could find, and you could reach new customers as a result of that. And then I think it gets into more of so once you if you can overcome that cultural barrier, the technical is almost the easy bit. If you've got someone in your organisation that can do it, or if we can put them in contact with a supplier or someone who can support them through that journey in the ODI. I've done a lot of that kind of quite dedicated support, haven't you, with some of them?
Yeah, and I think going back to that point of getting strategic buy-in, the higher up the pecking order you can get somebody in the organisation to sign off on it, the easier it is then to drive it through. And I think the other thing is, you sort of mentioned it, having a place where that data is going to go, so that somebody isn't just publishing it on a whim and it's just going to be there in the ether, but they can see that it's going to go into a specific campaign. It creates a much more compelling kind of argument when you're trying to sell them on the idea. So it's not just kind of publish it and they will come, it's like publish it and it's going to go into this thing, you're going to get benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Follow-up question.
Yeah.
Sorry. Have you been approached by any other sectors or any other kind of bodies that look at physical activity elsewhere to do a similar thing?
We definitely have sort of strong relationships with, for example, Scotland and Wales. So they're looking at this and thinking, yes, this is something that we would like to be involved in. So we're having conversations with Sport Scotland and Sport Wales as well, and Sport Northern Ireland are doing a lot with data as well. I'm trying to think, probably not with it a bit, well, not within sport, but even, I guess, Ofwat, we've had conversations, who obviously are water regulators. We've shared our journey with them, I guess, and they're thinking about how that could help their sector. And likewise, as a lottery distributor, so obviously Sport England receives national lottery money, which we redistribute, as does Heritage Lottery and Arts Council and other like organisations. And I think they're looking at this and thinking, right, what could this actually support, not just physical activity opportunities, but more wider cultural opportunities? So for example, if you could search for art galleries, museums, like sort of is that a problem? So I guess it's working out whether this is the same problem for their sector in terms of not being able to find activities or opportunities online. And actually DEFRA as well, wasn't it? We just spoke to DEFRA yesterday. They're another one sort of in terms of they've got sort of Year of Green Action as sort of a campaign coming up next year. And so we've been talking to them about how could this help people find opportunities to get outside in their environment and to take social action, which is quite interesting.
Patrice, you had a question?
Hi. I was just thinking, firstly, apologies for my annoying coughing. Not much you can do about that. But just thinking, because it's a community-led initiative and there's a lot of different things happening, say for like the sustainability research and the other kind of technical standard stuff that's going on, are there any particular kinds of people or organisations that you're particularly interested in to help kind of enrich that community so you can drive those things forward?
Yeah, definitely. As I said, we've got sort of our core kind of part of our traditional sector definitely involved at the moment, but we want that to be as broad as possible. So like you said, we're working with like the Outdoor Association, and so their sector partners, we'd love them to be involved. We're also thinking as well at the moment about how do we support sort of the smaller scale organisations, so more voluntary community-led organisations, because as I said, our sector isn't just made up of the big. We're quite fragmented. You know, we've got lots of kind of one-to-one like yoga instructors. So there's lots that we need to think about as well. But we want them to be aware of OpenActive, definitely. And as we're working with charities, so moving into that health space, there's definitely a role for them. Because our sector, it's hard to define it. Like as we move forward and we reach new markets almost, like you said, we want physical activity to be where you go, rather than you having to find it first and foremost. So even things like youth hostels, sort of lots of different housing associations. There's lots of partners that we haven't yet really tackled. Education, see, I could just keep listing them. So, yeah.
So I think we have a couple more minutes for any more questions if there are any in the room. One over here, yeah.
Yeah, geospatial data. Everything happens somewhere.
Sorry, can you speak?
Yes, everything. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, everything happens somewhere at some time. So the importance of events relating to sport is geospatial. You've got a project, I think, which is a open geospatial project. Would you be able to marry that up with what you're doing with open data for OpenActive?
I think ODI, that's...
So Lee Dodds is our sort of geospatial expert, and he's leading the geospatial work that we've got at ODI, but he also he chairs the standards group on OpenActive. So there's a kind of, you're right, there's a natural overlap between those two things. So it's certainly something we want to address more over the next few months.
And we'd also hope that a lot of our startups actually as well, our startups definitely have that place focus because they're thinking about that consumer, so place naturally comes out in their thought process. So we have startups actually who are thinking about not just the data we're opening, but how can they use that alongside existing geospatial data sort of from sort of Environment Agency, and sort of how do they marry those two together to develop their product or their service. Yeah.
Cool, great. So that brings us to a close. Just want to say thanks very much, Alison, for coming in and giving a talk. I thought it was really great. Obviously, I'm a bit biased, but and thanks for everybody in the room for coming and everybody who listened to the live stream. Cheers.